Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall, and today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Corey Tulaba and Albert Ghim of the Draftdaq podcast and No Ceilings NBA to discuss their takeaways from the early season, including Corey's number one most underrated player, their thoughts on Emoni Bates, is he back, and so much more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today, and every day we're now available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by SweatBlock. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweater odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. It's also available on Amazon. And who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, a play-by-play broadcaster. Typically, I would be joined by Alex Wolf, the excellent editor-in-chief of The Strict Limit, which you can check out at thestrict.land on all forms of social media. But instead, I got my buddies from No Ceilings NBA, Albert Ghim, Corey Tulaba. We're talking Jarace Walker, Emoni Bates, a whole bunch of other interesting prospects, and who their top choice would be for the Knicks if they land somewhere in the late lottery range, 8 to 16. I don't know about you guys. I feel like that's a pretty fair projection. So without further ado, let's get into it with Corey and Albert, starting with Corey's take on who the most underrated player in the NBA draft is going to be.
I think for me, the guy who I'm most interested in watching is going to be Jarace Walker from Houston. He's a guy that I planted my flag on very early in the process, and I went as extreme as you possibly could by putting him at number 3 on my board when he's ranked by consensus as the 10th ranked guy, but there are outlets that, preseason had him out of the first round. There are outlets that have him hovering around like 17 or 18. But what I've been trying to do through this process is not necessarily go by like who's going to have the best college season, or who is gonna be the most consistent player night in, night out. I'm trying to look at guys who fit the direction of the NBA, and you aren't just projecting them for now and looking at them because they're the leading scorer on their college team, but guys that could do, maybe have a little bit more inside of them that people think, and the rest of the stuff that pops is going to be stuff that goes more under the radar, unnoticed, maybe isn't the stuff that you see on the stat sheet. And with Jarace Walker, he's 6'8", he's 240 with a 7'2" wingspan. And that 240 is not like, oh, he's got some baby fat that he needs to lose. Like, he would go in and body NBA players yesterday. He is just a man amongst boys. And when I look at his skills, I see flashes of guys like Scotty Barnes and Patrick Williams and Jeremy Grant, and guys who are just having like a tremendous amount of success at the next level, or at least that archetype is. And he's a guy that can legitimately guard 1 through 5, because that 240 pounds allows him to, wall up when he gets switched onto a big, if there's a big who goes at him in the post. Are you going to start him against Nikola Jokic? Obviously, that would be disastrous, which mostly is for anybody who guards Jokic. So maybe it's something worth trying, but I think that his playmaking ability and his ability to, be a guy that you can run action for on the elbow, and you get into DHOs, and, he could either make passes, or he's got such a quick, explosive first step that he can go and finish at the rim. I think he's a much better three-point shooter than, people are projecting him to be. I think he's confident, and I think he's got a good handle and creation ability. And I just look at, what he could be at the NBA level, and I'm like, I'm seeing it. And he's going to a Houston team that they're just made of dogs. So his personality-wise, he fits right in. I think they're going to make a run to the Final Four because he's playing with a guy like Marcus Sasser, who, I'm also very high on. And they just play a very NBA style. He's going to get, just great coaching and a great experience. And I think by the time this process is over, we're going to start hearing his name a lot earlier. Do I think he's going to go 3rd overall? No, I don't. But I do think that as a prospect right now, and what I've seen early on, there's nothing that's changed my mind to move me off that spot. I just love everything he brings to the table. And I'm excited to see if I'm either a fool based on what I watched pre-college, or if I'm vindicated by what I saw in the high school tape.
What do you think of him as like an overall like creator, like both for himself and others? Because to me, that's interesting with someone like Scotty Barnes, where I again very at a very amateur level, like I didn't totally get the hype like coming out of college. Was just like, all right, like is this guy scoring? Like he's not even starting, but it feels like there is more of a premium on someone who like defensively, to your point, you're never gonna have to take off the floor. Is never gonna be a liability in any situation, and then offensively just has like basically like just everything in their toolbox to fit in any context, like versus someone like, I mean, obviously this person's no longer considered a top 5 prospect, but someone like an Emoni Bates, who's just a pure scorer, but then maybe lacks in all those other areas.
Yeah, so for me, like I really like his creation ability. Like, do I think he's going to develop into a number 1 option, maybe like Kawhi Leonard did or something? The odds are against that for like almost any prospect that you're going to draft ever, like in any draft. But I think that he's got some real creative stuff out on the wing, and like you can't bump him off his spot. So he's got this tight, low handle with these long arms. You can't really disrupt him. And then, much like Scotty, he's shown these really impressive flashes in the mid range. Like he's got this smooth turnaround jumper. It's got soft touch. I think that the creation stuff is what is underrated, because I think that most people just look at him as like an energy, maybe defensive guy. And I'm trying to see what kind of X's and O's stuff NBA teams are doing and what players are having success. And he just reminds me so much of all of these guys who are like Jeremy Grant is who anybody could have gotten for so cheap, is such a big part of what Portland's doing right now. Portland, outside of Jeremy Grant, like they went and just got a ton of these wings who could just do so much on the floor and be interchangeable. And it's paid huge dividends for them. You know, they're just guys all over the place, like Nas Little and, just guys who people were finding on the scrap heaps. Like these guys are working in this modern NBA with the way teams are playing. So that's what I'm forecasting with Jarris Walker. And so far, I like what I see at the college level.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting about like just having one of those like pure, like tiny, like offensive first point guards, whether it's a Dame, whether it's a Trae Young. And I mean, we even saw this with Steph back in the day before he became a really good defender, just throwing as many like long bodies around them as possible. And for like most of Dame's prime, like Portland was attempting that, but they had these guys that were so limited on offense, like Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless. And it feels like late in his career, what'd you say?
Nick Batum,
yeah. I mean, like he might have been the best version of that, but
right, for sure.
It's kind of like they've finally found like the right like balance there and like found two-way guys, and that's where those guys are really valuable, because it feels like I don't know, Albert, you can comment on this, like not that obviously Trae Young and Dame Lillard aren't a dime a dozen, but more than ever, like you can find those scoring point guards. And it seems weird because those are the guys that are going to lead your team in scoring. But it's almost like the fallacy of drafting a quarterback too early in fantasy football. Like, yes, he's going to be the leading scorer, but there's so much scarcity at other positions. You want to take a running back first. Like maybe like do these wings continue to become even more valuable in that, like, all right, we can find the point guard, but we need the person who can cover up their weaknesses.
No, I 100% agree with that, right? Guard play is unbelievable in the NBA right now. But I also think the point that Corey's making about what a guy like Jarris Walker can become speaks to what I think the NBA is trending towards as well. These teams are looking for jumbo playmakers, right? Guys who have great size and can also play both ways, but also can be guys that you rely on to make decisions for you with the ball in their hands. And I think Corey's the one who put me onto Jarris Walker a couple months back, and a guy that I also have really high on my big board. I think I also have him at 3. He's a guy that, as Corey mentioned, when you look at him, you might think of, his physique looks a lot like Isaiah Stewart. Okay, so he'll rebound for us, and he'll maybe learn how to shoot a 3-pointer or whatever. Like he'll be as Corey said, an energy guy. Maybe he's the second coming of Jason Maxiell is what people might think looking at him.
What a name! Great pull. Jason Maxiell and Ryan Gomes, 2 names I didn't expect to hear in this podcast.
That's what you get when you're with us.
Let's go.
But I will say with Jarris Walker, he is much more than what you may assume about him. He's a guy who, as Corey, I know Corey went on a long thing about his game, but the stuff that he can do with the ball in his hands is what I think the modern NBA is going to be looking for. And why I know for both of us, him being third on our big boards might seem ridiculous, but who knows? Maybe by the end of the NBA season, NBA teams really start to pay attention to him and realize, okay, like he's the type of guy that we want on our team, either making decisions for us or helping make decisions for us, is I think the type of ceiling that he has, because the handle with him is real. The passing with him is real. And then you watch him play defense for 5 minutes and you're going to get blown away with the intensity and his ability on that side of the ball as well. And then we talk about the shooting upside and everything's there. So once again, he is kind of this full package prospect that I think teams should be looking at. And to go back to your original question, yeah, guards are kind of everywhere, right? Guys who can score and can put the ball in the basket, but guys like Jarace Walker, who had that type of size and physique, but can do so much more than just be energy guys, are going to become, I think, more common, but for now are pretty rare and hard to find.
All right, guys, when we come back, we are going to continue some takeaways from the Champions Classic. And then I want to get some thoughts on Emoni Bates, because he had an incredible game against the Michigan Wolverines. And I wanted to know if he could potentially be a steal for this draft. The Knicks could certainly use a high-level shot maker. But before we get into that, BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Personally, I'm going and looking at MVP odds. Look, Jason Tatum is rightfully the heavy favorite at this point. Pains me to say, Celtics are the best team in the league. He's the best player on it. Makes a whole lot of sense. But the Warriors, starting with that game against the Knicks, have been playing a lot better of late. And Steph Curry is having just an absurd out-of-body type of season. So I wouldn't mind putting some money down on him. He's only 10-1. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. No, I think it's a great point, and I think we see it every year, like come playoff time, where you're really picking on individual defenders, but simultaneously you're doing the same thing on defense, where you're picking on poor offensive players, and that means leaving them alone and ignoring them. Like those subtle differences, like during the a full regular season, like this isn't a good example, but like a prime Nick Batum compared to like a Scotty Barnes, like might not make a huge difference. And then in round 3 of the playoffs, like that slight upgrade and like in passing and an ability to say, all right, you're going to put like a smaller guy on me. All right, I'll take him to the post and I'll torch him. Like it's not just that I'll shoot over him. Like all that stuff is additive, and it makes a substantial difference. So I guess while we're on the topic of big games, we were talking about this a little earlier with the Scoot Wemby conversation, but that Champions Classic the other night, I always like those things as early season benchmarks. And of course it's easy to read too little into them. Like even NCAA tournament games, like everyone, if I'm remembering correctly, Joel Embiid wasn't great during the NCAA tournament. Doesn't seem like it mattered that much. He's really great. So there's a balance to be struck there, but I do like them as early measuring stick points of younger guys. So Corey, I'll throw it back to you. What were your takeaways from the other night?
So I got to stream the first game between Michigan State and Kentucky with a few of the guys and gals at No Ceilings. And if you were a part of that playback stream with us, you would know that I was like, I can't believe this game is going into overtime and we have to sit here and watch more free basketball. And it's going into another overtime and we still have to stay here. Like, it was not a great game from a NBA draft scouting perspective. Like, Michigan State is a pretty good college basketball team. Like, they have a lot of players that are good college players. I think they're going to be competitive. They're probably going to beat some teams that maybe they're not favored to beat, but not a lot of draft prospects on that squad. Kentucky, I think, we've set the over-under on, when we did over-unders on the pod, at 2.5 draft prospects for that team. And I think we went under. Cason Wallace, he's a guy that Albert is writing about and likes a lot. I'm a little cooler on, but I completely get the appeal. And he did things yesterday that kind of swayed me a little bit. And then he did some other things where I was like, this is why I feel this way. But he's a guy that, like, I think he had 7 or 8 steals last night. And like, if you look at his box score, he was shot 50% from the floor. He probably had like 5 or 6 assists. Like, he did a lot of nice things. He's a very legitimate prospect who has a chance to go anywhere from, I think, lottery to, if things really pop with him and he develops, to potentially top 10. So for me, I wish that I learned a little bit more than I did, but you can't just watch one game, and especially early on in the season, when teams are finally playing real teams and they have to adjust to that versus whoever the F State university that they're playing, pre-Champions Classic. So from the game that I covered, I'm glad I got to finally get a look at Casey Wallace in this context, but I'm still left with just as many questions as I got answers.
Albert, what about you?
I think for me, just going back, because as I mentioned, I was able to watch the Duke Kansas game. I think the first thing that we have to take away from that game is that Jalen Wilson from Kansas is a real guy.
Yeah.
He's a guy that I think NBA teams are going to pay way more attention to. And we talked about it on the stream last night too, but heading into the season, ultimately the team was asking him to fill the role that Ochai Agbaji left as he left for the NBA this past season. And a lot of times when you get a player and you tell him to fill the role of a lead guy from the previous season, that's a big ask, right? It's difficult for a player to come in and to just emulate or to fill those shoes. And in a lot of ways, Jalen Wilson is showing the world like, hey, I think I might be up to the task. I mean, he had an unbelievable game on both ends of the floor. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a perfect game, but he showed, I think, scouts and front offices that he is a guy that deserves to be mentioned in the conversation in terms of him being a first round draft prospect. So, some of the shot making he was doing last night was incredible. The defense was really, really good. He was asked to carry a large burden by that team to go and get shots and make shots. And so the fact that he was able to do that was awesome. And the last thing that I did want to talk about was Duke. That team, I think, is going to be really hard to judge until Dariq Whitehead comes back, just because they are a team that they have a really hard time creating shots for themselves. So I think we need to wait in terms of how we judge that team. And then Derek Lively came in, who is another highly touted freshman for them, a center, and he had a pretty quiet game. Wasn't his best showing. And I think that also is another thing where he's a big, and as we know, bigs take time, and he looks like he's going to need some time to develop and to eventually get to where he needs to be to show NBA teams that he's worthy of, being a highly selected first round pick. So guys like Derek Lively and that team in general at Duke, I think they're going to need some time, and they're going to need Dariq Whitehead to come back before we can make some big judgments about their outlook this season.
Yeah. I didn't prime you guys on this one, but I said his name and I realized I want to know about him. So Emoni Bates, monster first game against Michigan. I know he was a guy who was off draft boards at one point with the legal issues this summer that seemingly and thankfully have resolved themselves. I know even despite that, he's someone who's considered a borderline first round pick coming into the season by most people. Did that performance change either of your perceptions on him? Where will he go? Where should he go? Just tell me anything you know about Emoni Bates. I either can jump in.
I think that there will be a team somewhere in the second round that probably takes a shot on a blue chip guy, similar to how maybe a team, Orlando took Caleb Houston or Denver took a shot on.
Oh, yeah, who was it with and the Mavs in the second round? They got
Jaden Hardy.
Yeah.
I think it may come a little bit later, but who knows if he stays just on where he's lighting the net on fire. Obviously, things change. I saw him live last year, and it was really tough. It was a tough watch. He was a year ahead of everybody. He reclassified, so he was younger. He was supposed to be a senior in high school. You definitely have to take that into account. But there's something about his game. You touched on it earlier. How many teams are drafting Emoni Bates to come in and be a guy who they want to be a guy who's taking the bulk of the shots in the offense? I don't know. Maybe there's one team who thinks he still has that upside and they're willing to bet on it. But I don't know if he does enough outside of the fact that he could be a heat check guy to ultimately rework himself into a first round grade. He's just he was very advanced early on, and sometimes that's really hard to kind of evaluate because guys mature physically and they catch up, and guys come out of nowhere. Last year Shaedon Sharpe was a guy who came out a year early, and he had an incredible peach jam and jumped up 30 spots in the ranking, and all of a sudden he's the number one guy in his class. that kind of stuff happens. So it's hard on these guys who have all this hype early on. And I feel like so often, we're looking to deem him the next guy to put him on a magazine cover. And very rarely does that work out. Like, I mean, historically, it's like LeBron and Luka had the benefit of not being in the spotlight of the American media, so and now we'll see it with Victor. He's been a guy, but obviously he's just a freak genetically and, like skill wise. So he's a whole different discussion. There's a ton of skinny guys who can jack up shots in the NBA who, if they are given a bigger role, can work their way to 20 points. Tim Hardaway Jr. was a guy who was, one of the top options on the Knicks. And, is he a guy who is definitely in your top 7 or 8 of a rotation on a lot of teams? Like, not definitely,
yeah.
right?
Corey,
like,
I was thinking of Alonzo Trier when you were talking about this, and I was getting a really bad feeling.
Yeah. I don't want to touch on Alonzo Trier. He is a funny subject if you're deep into the weeds of draft Twitter. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know how valuable his skill set is. So I think it's great, and we love a redemption story. Like, I'm rooting for him, and I'm hoping more so than him throwing up a bunch of 25-point games that he's putting up 20 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and like being efficient and just showing he has more to his game than just a guy who is going to take step back logo threes. Because I just don't know if there's a role for him in the NBA if that's who he wants to be.
All right, guys, we'll be back one final time with Corey and Albert to make some predictions on who could be an absolute steal for the New York Knicks if they end up, let's just say, somewhere between the 8 and 16 range in the NBA draft. I feel like that's pretty reasonable. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about one of our favorites here on Locked On Knicks, and that is SweatBlock. This is a product that is near and dear to my heart because I used to be terrified. I went to college in Phoenix, so it was really, really hot all the time. I go on dates and I didn't want the pit sweat. That was my worst nightmare. It's the least attractive thing that could be happening to a person. Or maybe there's some more, but it's in the mix, certainly. And I finally found a product that totally cures my issues, and it is SweatBlock. The SweatBlock wipes have been a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years with over 10,000 5-star reviews. Don't miss this opportunity to try SweatBlock. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweater odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. Also available on Amazon.
I 1,000,000% agree with everything that Corey said. I mean, ultimately, the situation that he was in last year, essentially Penny Hardaway was asking him to be the next Penny Hardaway and to run that team. And it was not the ideal situation. And then now he's gone through a lot. And, sometimes adversity and, mistakes and life decisions, whatever, can mature a man. So I don't know yet. I think it's still a lot is to be decided with how, things end up with Emoni Bates. But like Corey said, I can 100% see a second round team taking a bet on him. I don't think I could have him in that first round conversation. I mean, unless he goes supernova and just decides to score 30 points every game, then we'll see. Obviously the conversation can change, but with what we've seen and with what's going on right now, I think it's safe to say that he'll probably go second round or go undrafted, and then we'll see what happens from there.
All right, let's bring this thing full circle to take it home. The New York Knicks, they will not tank, so they will probably end up somewhere between the 8th and the 16th pick in this year's draft. Is there one guy that either of you or just a general consensus has going in that range that you think could be a good fit for their team, which is a very difficult question because they obviously we had you guys on. We talked about this last year. They didn't draft anyone because there wasn't really an obvious hole in their rotation because they in fact had too many players. And anyways, I'll stop. Corey, what do you think?
Man, I guess we'll see what the direction that they ultimately choose. I mean, obviously I said that Jarris Walker is, the 3rd ranked prospect on my board, and he's currently ranked to go 10, by consensus. Brandon Miller out of Alabama is a guy who came in at 15 on those boards, who I have at 5, who is another guy I think is ultimately going to shoot up boards. He's kind of answered a lot of early questions that teams had for him, but he's a guy that is, I think, fits the direction of the league. Another 6'9", can do multiple things. His shot has come along. can defend a bunch of spots. There was a really hilarious possession in one of his games where he was like calling out a switch with his teammate, and his teammate just wasn't doing it, so he just like shoved him into the spot, and like they still scored because he was there late. But like, you know, he has like that a basketball feel on both ends that, you know, is kind of impressive. Those are the kind of guys I think would really be ideal. Maybe if somebody really comes out of nowhere as like a big wingy shooter, that could be nice. But I still think the Knicks need guys who are guys who could play multiple positions. So you don't have to pigeonhole them and be like, yeah, like Obi's really tough to play with Julius Randle. Even, you know, it worked recently, and Knicks fans are obviously correct in wanting to see more of it. But there are questions there that you have, even if you are the highest on both of those guys as a fit. So if you can find guys who are unquestionably able to play multiple positions in that spot, I think that's something to really, you know, consider. And that's the guy, again, I would target, because I just feel like that's where the league is headed. Unless the Knicks strike gold and they work themselves into that top 4 conversation, if they ultimately miss out, and then we're partying. Let's go get Keontae George or, you know, whoever, you know. So but those are the kind of guys I would look for if the Knicks, you know, don't make like a playoff run.
This is a tough question for me, just because, I mean, going back to our original conversation, what the Knicks end up doing, I think, is going to be really interesting. And there may be a world where they don't even get to pick in the first round this year, right after certain trades or whatever. But if I had to give you an answer, a couple of guys that come to mind for sure, guy like, and once again, like this Knicks team is such a weird team. Like we have so many guys at so many different positions. You start to wonder, well, okay, like who do you draft to play behind 12 different guys is kind of difficult, right? But a couple of names that I did want to mention, a guy like Arthur Kaluma from Creighton might be an interesting guy to watch. Yeah, Big East guy with great size, developing jump shot, a guy who plays really, really hard, who is unafraid of the big moment, had his best game of the season last year in the tournament against Kansas, a guy that I think a lot of teams should be paying attention to. He's one guy that comes to mind. Another guy that Corey and I absolutely love is Jaime Jaquez Jr. from UCLA. He's just a wing, right? With great size, great physique, improving jump shot, a guy who can make plays with the ball in his hands, but can also play like a secondary, tertiary role as well, which goes to Corey's point, right? You want guys with that versatility piece, right? So I think Jaime Jaquez Jr. is a guy who could provide that type of versatility as well. And then if I want to talk about like a high-end guy, and I'm not even like, Corey already mentioned Brandon Miller, who I absolutely loved, and all these guys, but I don't know. Maybe we go back to the Dariq Whitehead conversation, right? He might be a guy who, if he never like fully comes back from injury this season and has like a slow start when he gets back, and then teams start to get a little cold on him, maybe he drops to the end of the lottery, and maybe the Knicks end up there, and then it's kind of the perfect match because he's a really good shooter with decent size, and I think has some juice on the ball and may become a really, really good NBA player someday. So those are a couple of guys that come to mind. But overall, for me, like I really do hope the Knicks figure something out here, and maybe there's a star out there we can go and get. But it's going to be, I don't want to say fun, but it's going to be an interesting season to watch the New York Knicks.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a tough question when a team simultaneously has no need, but because of that has every need. But you guys did an excellent job breaking it down. Before I let you both go, can you tell everyone where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, find us at noceilingsnba.com. We release articles 6 days a week for free. Just go to the website, subscribe, and you can find all of our stuff from the entire team there. There's links to the YouTube. There's links to the podcast, which we have now moved to a daily podcast. So the Draftdaq feed has moved to the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. We have Draft Deeper, Deep Dives, a new show called Home and Away, and then the classic No Ceilings show. So we have 5 podcasts every day, and you know, we're constantly putting out stuff. We just had a video hit 350,000 views on TikTok. Wow. So we're doing the TikTok thing now. We're getting in on it, trying to keep up with the trend. So we're everywhere. The Nate Grubel, our content manager, likes to say No Ceilings is everywhere, and we're trying to live up to that.
Yeah, I can speak from experience. Nobody matches the hustle of you guys. That would certainly be in the scouting report. And as always, I have so much fun when I get to talk to you. And you know what? I'm someone who is not particularly inclined to watch a ton of college basketball before the tournament in recent years. You guys are making me want to invest. Check out a couple of games. Check out some of his prospects, and keep my finger crossed that they're either Knicks or they are trade chips for the Knicks to get a guy. But until next time, we'll talk to you guys soon. We'll talk to everyone listening soon on Locked On Knicks.